recognising when teenagers were at harm early and working with those families to wrap support around those families. We need a kind of ring of protection for those kids.
Colin will be talking about this later this hour. An economic think tank is warning that millions of families face a cost of living catastrophe in 2022. The Resolution Foundation says that from next April, families will be £1,200 a year worse off due to soaring energy bills and a rise in national insurance contributions. At the same time, rising inflation means that real pay levels will stay the same. A Merseyside police officer has been sacked for gross misconduct after taking selfies at a murder scene while on duty. PC Ryan Connolly took photos of himself while guarding the cordon in 2018. He also had homophobic, racist and offensive images on his phone. Deputy Chief Constable Ian Critchley said Connolly's actions were appalling and beyond comprehension. And the Royal Mint, has unveiled 2 new coins to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. The 50p coin is the first of its kind to recognise a royal event, whilst the £5 coin follows the tradition of marking previous jubilees on crown pieces. They are the first collector's items to be released in memory of the Queen's 70-year reign. You're up to date with the latest news. We'll have more for you in an hour. Well, do wish we could start an hour of news without focusing and leading off as our main story on COVID, but we're not quite there yet. So, in the meantime, let's tell you about this. In England, the government is facing calls to cut the COVID quarantine period from 7 to 5 days. In Scotland, the SNP, it's under pressure to reduce its current 10-day self-isolation requirement. Their MSPs that Holyrood are going to be hearing from the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, in the next couple of hours, in fact. Well, when it comes to making big decisions like this, what lessons, if any, can be drawn from what's happening abroad? Well, US health officials have cut the number of days Americans have to self-isolate with COVID. So long as they're not necessarily showing any symptoms, all those who caught the virus were previously made to isolate for 10 days from infection, the point of infection. Now, asymptomatic Americans can leave the house after just a mere 5 days, provided, that is, they wear a mask for the remaining 5, presumably that's while they're out and about. Well, officials from the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention said this decision was scientifically informed and would, quote, keep society functioning. Let's turn to Professor Andrew Preston, who's a microbiologist at the University of Bath. Professor, thanks for your time, as ever. Do appreciate it. It's a difficult balance that's got to be struck here for governments, not just in the UK, but elsewhere too, because we are beginning to see the fulfilment of a prophecy, in a sense, which is that if you make it difficult for people to go to work, for instance, in our National Health Service, because they're self-isolating, we end up with pressure on the NHS, not because of the virus, but because of our expectations over quarantine.
Absolutely. And this has been the dilemma throughout the pandemic. How do you balance trying to suppress the transmission of the virus whilst dealing with all of the collateral damage that any kind of restriction creates? And it's been such a difficult balancing act to try and achieve. I'm not sure that there is a natural balancing point where the sort of the harm from one, directly matches the harm from the other. So, but we should be looking at the data as it accrues. We learn a little bit more about Omicron probably every day, and if that data suggests that actually people are no longer infectious, for the most part at least, by 5 days, then of course that is the decision you can start to consider, whether you then need just to keep a couple of precautions in, such as you said, the CDC would still ask people to wear masks when they're in contact with other people for the remaining 5 days, or of course whether you then choose to say, well, it's 5 days as long as you're asymptomatic, but we would need 1 or maybe 2 negative lateral flows to allow you to then end isolation at that point. They certainly should be options we're considering.
Considering the newspapers today, there does seem to be an emerging consensus, I don't know how much it's backed up necessarily by science, that compared to where we were, for instance, a fortnight ago, yes, there were those in South Africa saying, don't panic, it's not likely to be as bad as Delta. It does appear from the hospitalisation figures we are seeing that it may not be as severe, and therefore we can begin to look, for instance, at quarantine periods being reduced. I mean, I know we have to heavily caveat that kind of conclusion, but it does feel the direction of travel is more promising than it could be.
No, absolutely, I agree fully with that. Certainly when Omicron was first discovered, if you sat down and tried to draw out on a piece of paper a really bad, dangerous-looking variant, then that would be Omicron. So it ticked all the boxes for something we should have been really, really concerned about, and of course we were. We've taken a little bit of a gamble by waiting to see whether the hospitalisation surge has materialised, and thankfully it looks as if it is not. So perhaps we've slightly dodged that bullet. So of course now, as we learn more about it, and as the risk level starts to, if we think the risk actually is relatively low, then we should adjust the measures we take to try and contain it or deal with it. And yeah, absolutely. So I agree. With the numbers of cases we've had over the last couple of weeks, I think we would all have expected to start to see some significant impact on hospitalisations by now, and thankfully we're not seeing the great number, even though in some areas it is increasing.
And I suppose what we don't know is why that is to some degree. Is it because things like the antivirals are working, dexamethasone, things like that we have, as not the antivirals, but things like dexamethasone, which are good for treating people who've got it? Is it the success of the rollout of the booster programme, the vaccination programme more generally, or is it, as some people have contended, that what we are seeing is part of that natural evolutionary process whereby the virus grows less virulent as time goes on? It may infect more readily, but actually kills fewer of its hosts, part of that process of moving to become something a bit more akin to flu.
I think it's probably a combination of factors. I'm not sure it's necessarily the natural evolution, because actually, really, COVID didn't kill sufficient proportion of its host to really for that sort of virulence to be a selection against it, particularly as that death, we think, was almost certainly happened after the virus had transmitted to a new host. I think, it's probably slightly fortuitous that despite the array of mutations it has, those mutations combined appeared to, yes, increase the infectiousness, but perhaps change the areas, the sites within the respiratory tract where the virus replicates. Initial data suggests that, if anything, it perhaps is restricted more to the upper airways, which is great for transmission, but fortunately then avoids a lot of the real damaging consequences of infection in the lower respiratory tract, which is where, of course, the really serious disease manifests itself. And of course, on the other hand, we've got now a significantly different immunity landscape compared to when Alpha or even Delta first appeared on the scene. So those things combined, I think, has led to the profile that we're seeing with Omicron.
Professor, we'll leave it there, but as ever, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, let's turn to Rebecca Butler, who's a former NHS nurse and barrister, who joins me now. Rebecca, thanks ever so much for your time. Do appreciate it. I mean, I don't know if you were able to hear what the professor was able to say there, but there is a sense that seems to have been emerging over the last 5 or so days that the early data is firming up a little bit now, especially on hospitalisations. And actually, just on hospitalisations, there are those who increasingly point to the fact that, yes, the hospitalisation data is good, but actually maybe better than we think, because actually quite a lot of people are hospitalised in such a way that maybe they're hospitalised for something other than COVID, but they test positive for COVID when they're in hospital. So actually those hospitalisation figures, though encouraging, may be even better than they seem.
Yeah, I think there's a 1,000 patient delta between the two numbers that you're talking about. So of the 5,000 or 6,000 that are currently in hospital with coronavirus, 4 of them were admitted with it as a result of it. It's also worth mentioning that just because you're tested in hospital doesn't mean you're an asymptomatic COVID sufferer, because you may become symptomatic and then your primary cause of staying in hospital thereafter is coronavirus as well. So yes, the other thing to remember, Colin, is of course that the vast majority of Omicron cases are in the younger age groups, and the younger age groups did not typically suffer badly in the original strain, the Alpha strain, or the Delta strain either. So it hasn't really worked its way through into the population. largely because the older age groups are triple vaxxed now, and so they are less likely to be ill. So, as your previous guest said, it is quite early to say, and you can't exactly match the data between Delta and Omicron. Delta was significantly more fatal and more serious. Omicron happily appears to be a much milder form of the disease for sure.
There's constant balancing act, isn't there? I mean, on the one hand, we all get the prudence of the precautionary principle, which says until you absolutely know how bad it's going to be, don't take any chances. But the problem with that analysis is the precautionary principle itself comes with problems. So, I mentioned to the professor there that we're seeing a problem with nursing staff in hospitals self-isolating. And were that it alone, then that would be a problem that could be kind of managed. What we can't manage is the actual impact on things like oncology and diagnostics. I was talking to Carol Sikora, world famous oncologist, a fortnight or so ago, who was saying, thousands of deaths from cancer that could have been avoided.
Yeah, that is the balancing act. And in some respects, if you look at Europe, Boris seems to have gone out on a limb with Omicron. But Europe is suffering a Delta epidemic as much as Omicron is on top of that. And so if you compare Boris to Europe, he looks a bit like an outlier. But, we're working on the data in the UK as it happens and really on a day-to-day basis because the data is very, very fresh on Omicron. And you're absolutely right. And it's not only patients that suffer, it's also the mental health of people in the community. It's also the economy. And I think, in a way, Boris does seem to have taken a real political gamble here, but I can't believe for a minute that he's taken a gamble when the numbers and the data seem to suggest that there's going to be a major problem. And as I said, we have the epidemic in the under 40s at the moment. If it does, switch into the 60s and 70s, then he might have to bring in other non-pharmaceutical interventions to, suppress the spread. The current situation in hospital is brilliant, but if you have nurses off, you then have to shut beds. So those same cancer patients, where there is a crisis, absolutely for sure, they could suffer delays in treatment or having, their chemotherapy started or their radiotherapy started purely because staff are off sick. So, the way you led into this program was, are we looking at a reduced time for self-isolation after infection? As the professor indicated, you have an issue with symptomatic and asymptomatic people. I think, Boris's political message has been, be sensible. Well, maybe now is the time to look at being sensible. If you're symptomatic, you're clearly not going to go back to work. But is 5 days going to be better than 7? Well, yes, I suspect it is, providing you feel well enough to do it and your viral load is down, as you can demonstrate with a test. So it is about being sensible and using your common sense. And I think Boris has actually led the way in being less autocratic, less sort of dictatorial about how we are to live our lives with coronavirus, and handing responsibility back to people and saying, just demonstrate common sense.
And Rebecca, just in terms of choices he's yet to make and may yet face, you use that phrase, it's the great, one of the great euphemisms of the year, if it comes to collecting come the end of the year, non-pharmaceutical interventions. It's a slightly chilling phrase, I think, for some people, because it suggests that there may be things like, I've just posted on Twitter actually some pictures from China of people who didn't comply, being marched around wearing overalls to demonstrate they hadn't been vaccinated. And we know that in some countries compulsion is in the air to some degree, don't we? Boris Johnson pictured this morning in a hospital saying, 90% of the people here in ICU haven't had any, either both jabs or a booster jab. So you can see why government's determined to get people vaccinated, but how much compulsion, really?
Well, Boris Johnson is in almost a unique, not quite a unique situation, in that the vaccination programme has been really enthusiastically taken up by the British population. And I think there is only something like 2.3 million unvaccinated adults at the moment. That's not a huge number. And, I'm very much for vaccination. I've trained as a vaccinator in the pandemic, so I'm very much for vaccination, but I am also for pro-choice. And the issues you're raising really are something that have been, discussed in the NHS for years. Should smokers get treatment for cancer? Well, of course they should. Should drinkers get treated for alcoholic liver disease? Of course they should. The NHS is for everybody. We don't turn around to a footballer on a Saturday, a sort of a minor league footballer, and say, "Sorry, you smashed up your knee, and it's your fault." We don't deny them health care. So I think we must be careful not to alienate those who have chosen not to have their vaccine, because a lot of them have done it for entirely legitimate reasons. In their own minds, they are concerned, they're scared about the reported side effects, and they feel it's been rushed through. I think it's about being gentle and kind with them, not mandating it, because even if you mandate it, I suspect those people won't have it either. So mandating is not really going to solve the problem.
And you know what,
Rebecca, big in the UK.
You really do not want to create a habit amongst potentially millions of people of disobeying the law, do you, apart from anything else? Rebecca Butler talking a great deal of sense there. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Coming up, according to the focus groups, we talk to the cost of living is the number one public concern pretty much right now, believe it or not. Are you right to worry? The thoughts of a leading think tank. After the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there. Mild and breezy through today and in fact into the new year, with rain at times. Now, low pressure in charge through this afternoon. You can see a real squeeze on the isobars, successive areas of cloud and rain pushing from the southwest towards the northeast. And what happens in between? You will see some sunshine. So despite the fact for many of us it was a wet start to the day, the rain is now moving ever northwards, lingering across central and northern areas of Scotland with a strong wind. Cloud breaks across England and Wales and Northern Ireland as we head through the afternoon, but still quite a brisk breeze. And you can see more rain waiting in the wings later. But temperatures will be on the mild side, coming in around 12 to 15 degrees Celsius. Now, through Wednesday evening and overnight, that rain clears the far north of Scotland. More rain arrives towards the southwest. In between, some clearer skies. Temperatures across the northeast of Scotland as low as 4 or 5 Celsius. Elsewhere, another mild end to the night. And again, you will see more rain as you step out on a Thursday morning. So, Thursday morning, wet and windy for many. Now, the rain could be heavy in places through the morning into the afternoon for Wales, Northern England, East Anglia, and again some heavy bursts for the northeast of Scotland. But across the north of the country, it will clear through the day. Some brighter skies, still quite breezy, but more rain continues, particularly across Wales and the West Country with that keen wind. Temperatures again will be on the mild side, 11 to 12, 13, 14 degrees Celsius, brighter towards the northeast. So that's the picture as we head through Thursday. Through Thursday evening and overnight, that rain continues its passage northwards. And again, murky skies further south, a bit damp, clearer skies across the far north, but temperatures holding up with that breeze, and that extends into New Year's Eve. And in fact, for New Year's Day as well, with some sunshine coming through. Bye-bye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Well, where would journalists be over the Christmas period without think tanks producing reports? Here's one. The think tank, the Resolution Foundation, has warned that 2022 will be the year of the squeeze as stalling wages, tax increases and soaring energy bills hit British households. They predict the average household will see spending increase by £1,200 next year, a consequence of high inflation and the highest tax burden in some years. There's a freeze on the personal income tax allowance and, of course, the social care levy on national insurance. UK inflation hit a 10-year high. That was in November. Some economists are already suggesting next year we'll see it rise. Well, I've seen 6% quoted as one figure. Furthermore, the think tank said that an increase in the energy price cap, that's coming in April, that will see some of the poorest households spending up to 12% of their earnings on energy. The Resolution Foundation say that we could be heading into a cost of living catastrophe. This is slightly catastrophising language, but you get what they're saying, and that could happen as early as the spring. Well, David Carter is a trustee from the Community Cupboard. It's a food bank in Kent. Thanks ever so much for joining us this afternoon, David. Appreciate your time. I'm guessing part of the problem for you and people in the food bank community is that a lot of the people who are using your services are on fixed incomes, whether that's pensioners or people on benefits. And we know that it's people on fixed incomes that are those most badly hit by soaring inflation.
Well, yes, absolutely. The news of a potential increase in any expenditure for a lot of the people that use our service, to use the language, it is catastrophic, and it certainly can be. People at this moment in time are struggling, and to know that potentially going forward things are going to get infinitely worse is obviously will be a huge concern, especially for the people that are on fixed incomes and relying on support from the government, etc.
And it's people who have been forced to make a sort of Hobson's choice. But, when you've got gas and fuel, electricity bills expected to rise as much as they are and have risen a lot actually in the last year, people have to make some rationing choices, don't they, on very limited incomes often. Is it food? Is it heating the house? Is it running the car so I can get the kids to school? These are really tough choices.
Absolutely, and it is literally exactly what you've just said. You know, these are conversations that we've had frequently in the months leading up to Christmas, let alone before any additional potential expenditure comes into play. You know, people are very concerned, and it really is a choice of having to choose between either putting the heating on or putting food on the table, and the mental health knock on from that could be catastrophic. So, yeah, I mean, it really is a very, very bad situation that the vast majority of people are finding themselves in.
David, what do you say to those people? I'm sure you come across them. They're out there who will say that food banks, like the one you're a part of, play an important role, but will always be abused by people who don't really need their services. What do you say to people who make that point to you?
Well, the simple reality is that, as with any type of thing like or potential abuse, but it's acceptable losses. You know, supermarkets lose X amount of their stock through damaged goods, but people can still buy food. You know, we are always going to get people who will try to abuse the system, but the amount of people that are in genuine dire need of food assistance and then signposting services that we can refer them to vastly outweighs anybody who would, you know, try to abuse the system. And there are checks in place that's largely down to us to govern these situations and do our homework and our due diligence. But now, if I've got a choice of losing a few tins of beans or potentially feeding a family for, you know, a week, fortnight, etc., I know which path I'm going to choose, you know. So those numbers, I mean, I can tell you now, we've been open for 3 years, and by our estimations, we've probably come across maybe 2 or 3 situations where we have ultimately found out that the people that were receiving the help didn't necessarily need it as much as they first implied they did. But we have over 1,300 families on it. So if you take 30 and allow for 2 families that have possibly taken apart.
Yeah, those numbers tell a story, don't they? David Carter, appreciate your time this lunchtime. Thanks a lot. Coming up, the royal writer Angela Levin joins us to discuss the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Today we saw these commemorative coins rolled out to mark the occasion. I'm not sure the pictures are there, but you can imagine them. They're pretty coins. It's after this news bulletin.
Thanks, Colin. Our top story at 12:30. The Prime Minister says 90% of people in intensive care have not received their COVID booster. Speaking at a vaccination centre, Boris Johnson said 2.4 million double jab people hadn't had their booster. He's urging them to get the jab so they could enjoy the new year. Scottish Parliament will be recalled this afternoon for a COVID update as case numbers reach record highs. The virtual session was announced last week after new restrictions came in, including closing nightclubs and 1 metre social distancing. Scots are also being urged not to travel to England for New Year's Eve, where clubs are still open. Some pharmacies are reporting a huge problem with shortages of lateral flow tests, saying there were requests every 5 minutes over Christmas. The Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies is warning of patchy supplies following a change in self-isolation rules from 10 to 7 days if someone tests negative. The social care system is not fit for purpose and is handing some children over to criminal gangs, according to a new report. The Commission on Young Lives says many teenagers are moved away from where they live and sometimes end up in areas with high levels of crime. The Department for Education says it is urgently reforming the system to address growing pressures. An economic think tank is warning that millions of families face a cost of living catastrophe in 2022. The Resolution Foundation says from next April, families will be £1,200 a year worse off due to soaring energy bills and rises in national insurance contributions. And the Royal Mint has unveiled 2 new coins to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. The 50p coin is the first of its kind to recognise a royal event, whilst the £5 coin follows a tradition of marking previous jubilees on crown pieces. You're up to date with the latest. We'll have more for you on all those stories at 1 o'clock.
watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, as I say, reports from think tanks and others are a bit of a staple for this time of the year. Let's draw attention to one of them, though. It's a new report that claims 16 and 17-year-olds in care are at risk of being drawn into crime due to what's been described as a social care system that is unfit for purpose. The report, it comes from the Commission on Young Lives. It calls for reform of the current system to protect vulnerable teenagers who make up a quarter of the children in care. Well, our West Midlands reporter, Balvinda Sidhu, has been speaking to the former Children's Commissioner for England, who's the chair of this report. That's Anne Longfield.
We've got is, in all kind of essence, an epidemic of teenagers that are coming to harm. They're being exploited, they're being targeted by gangs and those that wish to involve them in violence. And because of that, and because we aren't protecting them at the earlier stages, more and more teenagers have been coming into care. We've seen one of the biggest increase in teenagers coming into care that we've ever had. And almost a quarter of all children in care are now 16 and 17-year-olds. These teenagers coming in, they've often been living very vulnerable lives. They've been involved in violence. They've been targeted and exploited. They need a new kind of care.
The system, some would argue, isn't really doing anything for those young children it's been built for. I mean, we've seen the recent murders of Arthur Labinger Hughes and Star Hobson, and it seems that the same statements keep being made over and over again, that lessons need to be learned. When are those lessons going to be learnt?
Well, there is a review of children's social care going on at the moment, something that I pushed for some time. So there's an opportunity here to make improvements, and I really want teenagers to be high on that list. But there are some chronic themes going through the social care system at the moment. The lack of ability to identify early, the lack of data sharing, the lack of information, the lack of coordination with other agencies. And they're also stretched at the seams in terms of funding. The average cost of a place for a teenager at the moment is an eye-watering £4,000 a week, £200,000 plus a year. And there's many that will go up to £10,000 plus pounds a week. Now, that's a child who's fallen into crisis, that have very complex needs, that has escalating needs. Think what we could do with that funding if used earlier to protect those children from harm, to stop them falling into crisis, and also many more too. One of the things that we're really keen to look at is how we can develop new foster care models that actually could be really much better served for young people. Youth workers, for instance, if we could attract youth workers, train them up to be foster carers, they understand young people, they'll be able to build that relationship. That would cost a fraction of what we're now seeing.
What is the solution then? I mean, you've already mentioned one, a better foster care model, but what else do you think needs to be done to protect vulnerable teenagers?
I'd like a new teenagers' social care system, if you like. I'd like it to really concentrate on understanding and recognising when teenagers were at harm early and working with those families to wrap support around those families. We need a kind of ring of protection for those kids so the exploiters can't get to them. If they do have to go into care, then I want a really different approach, local foster care that can actually work with families.
Now, the Royal Mint has designed 2 new coins to commemorate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, what I'm really struggling with today. Anyway, those celebrations come next year. 2022 will mark Her Majesty's 70th year on the throne. There you go, 2 coins, a 50p piece and a £5 crown, both featuring a portrait of the Queen designed by the artist Jodie Clark. A Royal Mint spokesperson said that it was fitting that the historic anniversary is commemorated on a 50p coin, as it is Britain's most loved collectible coin. Did not know that. Joining me now, Angela Levin, royal commentator, biographer and journalist. Angela, so glad you could come in today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Delighted I heard you were actually able to come in today, so lovely to see you. Where to begin? We'll start with next year, I suppose. Such a long time on the throne, and still adjusting Her Majesty to life without her consort.
Yes, I think still adjusting isn't quite fair, because I don't think she'll ever get over it, because she says in her speech, which was very much not stiff upper lip, that the twinkle in his eye was there right through to the end. From the time, she said, by the time I saw him. And in a way that shows you what a determined young girl she was, that she saw him and made up her mind, and that was it. And I think we sometimes think that the Queen is not as strong as she is, you know, mentally. But here we are, something that I'm going to have that guy. And she's never regretted it, and he's been wonderful for her. And I think it's very touching, really. I noticed she'd lost quite a lot of weight.
Well, maybe come to that in just a second.
Yes.
Just on the speech itself. I mean, you write far more than I do, but I've written a bit. And as an exercise in writing, here's 10 minutes, and you're going to have tens of millions of people hanging on every word, or so you hope. I just thought it was an extraordinary piece of writing, and you know far better than I do, but it felt quite different. It felt like a sort of valedictory address to me slightly, and whatever that might mean, I don't know, but in terms of the future. But the language was really unbuttoned. I found it very emotive. It moved me to tears. I think a couple of my kids were moved to tears by it. 95-year-old woman doing that to us, it's amazing.
Yes. I think it was very emotional, and it was very interesting that she did decide to open up. And I think, in a way, it's an attempt to answer the hurt she's experienced this year. She would normally have ignored that, but I think the pain has been enormous from Harry and Meghan. I think she's been shocked to the core, and it must have upset her tremendously when Prince Philip was dying in hospital, and she had this extra anxiety to concern her. But she's not going to give in, but she wants you to know that she hasn't brushed it aside. And I think with Prince Andrew too, who is a real favourite with her, that she feels this is all very draining. But, she likes to be positive. She wants us all to be positive. Like she said, a new child is a new beginning, and she feels that about Christmas and Jesus, and so she's not a sort of negative person. And she said she was so thrilled that Prince Philip started off with worrying about climate change. It was in the 50s, well before anybody else did. And she was thrilled that her eldest son, Charles, is doing that, and he's passed that on to his eldest son, William, which is continuing the monarchy, which is very important to her.
She'll draw strength.
Also, she said, hugely supported by Camilla and Catherine. And there we have the foursome who really care about her, who look after her, who behave as she would like them to do as future royals and leaders. And I think that she didn't want us to know she was heartbroken, but she let us go with her about the sadness and understanding how people miss somebody close to them so much at Christmas for the first year.
You put it so well, because, I mean, there is a sense in which she's given her life to the nation. She's given her life of service to the institution that she epitomises, monarchy. And having put in all those decades of service, and there have been ups and downs, obviously, but as she comes in her twilight years, to see it potentially, to see a situation developing where, as you say, Prince Andrew, terrible headlines, and to some degree, deservedly so. Meghan and Harry, terrible headlines. Not a lot you can do about that. They're now beyond the orbit. They will continue to be a problem. But there are those 4 table legs, the Cambridges and the Cornwalls, who actually will give her hope.
Yes, absolutely. And we saw in the photo arrangements afterwards that Princess Anne featured quite well, because she's always been very good to her mother, and her mother's been able to lean on her. She looks a hardy, but she reminds him most of Prince Philip. They have the same way of thinking about life and the same sense of humour and all that. But there was nothing about, not even a picture, a glimpse about Prince Harry, although she did say she was very pleased to have 4 great-grandchildren this year. So again, she's trying to say, go towards the younger generation. Maybe she's saying without me or with less of me, but she's just remembers that that's very important too. Nobody lives forever, she said in much more elegant terms than I'm just saying.
No, far from it. Just a thought about that intruder in the grounds at Windsor Castle. I mean, OK, there's probably an active police investigation, so we're not going to speculate as to exactly what was going on there. But that sense that, and I spent a couple of years following the royals around, and I was always slightly surprised by how there wasn't more trouble that sort of accompanied them in a sense. It's an amazing act they pull off, that they're able to travel around the country. And I think it's very important they're physically seen by people. But they put themselves in some danger, you could argue, every time they do that. And this is a reminder of that there's always, there are people who wish them ill, physically wish them ill.
Yes. Well, the Queen has said that all the time I can remember, that I have to be seen to be believed. People must know that I'm out and about. And she didn't want privacy. That's what she didn't like about...
Wait, but nor did Meghan and Harry.
Well, that's what I meant. They didn't like it. But she feels that you have to be there. That's your duty. You can't pick and choose. Your duty is there. But I think it must be very nerve-wracking for anyone if they hear any of these stories and they're in a difficult mood, the country's in a difficult mood, that they are risking things. I know that Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, was very, very nervous on her wedding day in 2005, the second wedding to Prince Charles, because she wondered if somebody would come there and actually want to make a performance.
Well, there was that fanatical fringe, wasn't there, of sort of Diana diehards.
Yes.
Who just simply would not accept that Prince Charles could marry again.
Could move on.
Move on.
And he wasn't the only one to blame. I think that was important.
In terms of moving on, I mentioned Prince Andrew. He's in the headlines again today. How do you move on from a problem like Prince Andrew if you're this institution?
Well, I think Prince Andrew doesn't feel like a lot of us feel about guilty or wanting to get it sorted. I think he manages to wipe these things out of his mind, particularly if he can go horse riding. He's a man who sort of brushes things away. We saw that after Newsweek, that he'd made a catastrophic interview and afterwards he'd told his mother that it had gone really well. So if you've got somebody like that, you can't make a judgment with your own idea of what's right and what's wrong. But I think that today's news is that he feels that it's not right that a United States jury and court case can actually help for somebody who's living in Australia, because she's lived there for nearly several years now. I don't know exactly.
And for some people, that will feel like he's trying to wriggle on the
yes, but it won't get rid of the dark cloud. No. Not for a second. All these technical things where people win cases, they don't actually get rid of what the problem really is, and that is something that they've done, but they've just got away with it. And I don't think the public do like that for anybody, and certainly won't for Prince Charles, who you have to say, is a very arrogant man.
Andrew.
Prince Andrew, who's a very arrogant man. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say, a couple of people I know who've met him have nary a good word to say about him. But I just wonder, just practically, the days, it's very difficult for him to disappear completely, which is probably what they'd wish. But I mean, Where can he go? Where he's got no profile at all. Even when he's out riding his nag, there's people taking long lens photographs. So it's very difficult to completely disappear.
Well, he might want to do some representing of Britain for some sort of sales and business, but I don't think
on a far
people will want
Pacific island in the middle of nowhere.
Yes, yes. But I don't think people will want that. I think he's had it, and I think he wants to come back for the Jubilee, the Platinum Jubilee. But I don't think that Prince Charles will let him. Absolutely not. And the Queen didn't mention him, which I thought was also very significant.
To Meghan and Harry, I mean, as I say, the difficulty they've got is, I mean, to some degree, the Queen can turn to Andrew and say, look, love, you've blown it, disappear for the rest of your life, lest you do any more serious harm to this institution I cherish, along with tens of millions of people. They can't say that to Meghan and Harry.
No, they can't say that because she can split herself sometimes between her sense of duty, which is absolutely magnificent, and her mother, being a mother. And she just loves Harry. She can't help it. And I think that this way she's doing a sort of motherly exercise, whereas she doesn't want him to leave the royal family. And he will always be welcome back. That doesn't mean she's not brutally hurt. But she has to be strict because, you know, that is her duty as a monarch. It's not a sort of easy thing to do, I think. Must be very hard and difficult for her.
We've had several conversations over the last few months about the latest business deal entanglement that Harry's getting involved in, books, other kind of projects, Netflix, all the rest of it. Have you been surprised, nay, depressed, as I have been, at the speed with which he's gone about, I would say, arbitraging his royal status for enrichment?
I think it's horrific, actually. When I spent well over a year with him when I was writing his biography, I thought he was charming, charismatic, instinctive, masses of positive things. But you could see a dark cloud came over now and then, and he was mischievous. He always got involved with the baddies. He was very easily torn.
Is that what she is? Is that what she is?
I leave that up to everybody else to make an exercise. But he was always there for mischief and to be naughty and counterproductive, really. And I think that he's now turned into somebody who is incredibly nasty and spiteful for the sake of money, because he's not going to get millions and millions unless he gives them something very powerful. And this memoir that he's got coming up, which is an investigation of what happened with Diana, we believe, he's bound to attack his father and Camilla. And actually, I think he will do a lot of damage to the royal family.
Angela, very briefly, you know, people like us have been around the block a bit and have seen the royals over years incline in one direction. My kids have spent very many happy hours with over the Christmas period. Take a different view. It's very generational, this. You talk to a lot of young people and they see Meghan and Harry as exemplars of a certain unbuttoned attitude, rebels against this stifling, starchy monarchy. It's a problem.
Yes, it is, especially in America. Not that that matters to sort of any votes or anything, but in America they are right behind them. But I hope they'll learn. We all learn from our mistakes as we get older.
There you go. Won't probe any further. Thanks very much. Really appreciate you coming in as well. Thanks ever so much. Just time for a few of your emails. I've got no idea what we're about to look at. Let's see. Earlier in the show, we were speaking about the First Minister of Scotland, who is recalling Parliament this afternoon. Ron emailed, unhappy about the current COVID restrictions in Scotland. So there he is. People saying it's a lack of clarity that's the problem. Isn't this just incompetence by another name? Tony on email, also critical of the handling of COVID in Scotland. And just to remind you, 2 p.m. for First Minister Nicola Sturgeon's address to Holyrood and MSPs on that one. Tony saying these governments love COVID powers. It allows them to control their population even further for the greater good. Wales and Scotland are prime examples of this. Anna has emailed too and said the following. Nicola Sturgeon has been crafty. That's not a word used enough in public life. Crafty throughout the pandemic. She holds back until she knows what's going to be announced in England before making her move. Except, Anna, It looks like the reverse may have been true this time. She may actually end up following England's lead when it comes to reducing the amount of time that people have to self-isolate for. On the subject of lockdowns, David emailed in to say lockdown hasn't worked in the UK because there's so many people not following or policing the restrictions. And on the subject, a different subject, a potential cost of living crisis, the word catastrophe was used by the Resolution Foundation, which might be slightly hyperbolic. It's been predicted for next year inflation could be as high as 6%, I think some. James emailed this. I have 2 weeks until my next payday. I have £3 to my name. I have very little food left and I have less than a fiver on my gas and electricity. I feel like a third world citizen. Crikey, James. Well, we wish you well. And thanks for your contribution. Coming up, Nicola Sturgeon, just over an hour away then, from announcing whether Scotland will face tighter restrictions. We'll talk with experts about what this could mean for the struggling hospitality industry after the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Hello there, really good afternoon to you. Colin Brazier with you for the next hour. Coming up, if Omicron isn't hospitalising on the scale some thought, does that mean England should cut the COVID self-isolation period from 7 days to 5? We asked that because the US has announced it will allow asymptomatic Americans to return to society after 5 days in quarantine. The Insulate Britain protesters cost a taxpayer, you and I, assuming you pay tax, over £4 million in policing. How many homes could the government have insulated if they weren't busy peeling people off the roads? There's the question. Meanwhile, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling will appear in the 20th anniversary reunion special. However, not in person because of her what have been described as anti-trans comments. So, is this all the actors will give to the one who created their characters, or are they a bunch of ingrates? And finally, Nicola Sturgeon will be addressing her MSPs in Scotland at 2 p.m. to discuss those COVID restrictions. But first, Paul with the headlines.
Thanks, Colin. The Prime Minister says 90% of people in intensive care have not received their COVID booster. Speaking at a vaccination centre, Boris Johnson said 2.4 million double-jabbed people hadn't had their booster. He's urging them to get the jab so they can enjoy the new year.
I'm sorry to say this, but the overwhelming majority of people who are currently ending up in intensive care in our hospitals are people who are not boosted. If you're not vaccinated, you're 8 times more likely to get into hospital altogether. So it's a great thing to do. It's very, very important. Get boosted for yourself and enjoy New Year sensibly and cautiously.
Meanwhile, the Scottish Parliament will be recalled this afternoon for a COVID update as case numbers there reach record highs. The virtual session was announced last week after new restrictions came in, including closing nightclubs and 1 metre social distancing. Scots are also being urged not to travel to England for New Year's Eve, where clubs are still open. The Lib Dem MP Christine Jardine believes the UK-wide governments should have joined forces from the start of the pandemic.
We should have had from the beginning in this, I believe, is that we should have had a much more concerted, more cooperative, four nations approach. The United Kingdom government should have been, if you like, setting the benchmarks, and we should have had local responses to what was happening. Instead of which we have this confusion about the UK government saying one thing and then the Scottish government saying another.
Some pharmacies are reporting a huge problem with shortages of lateral flow tests, saying there were requests every 5 minutes over Christmas. The Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies is warning of patchy supplies following a change in self-isolation rules from 10 to 7 days if someone tests negative. The UK Health Security Agency says the delivery capacity for testing kits has doubled to 900,000 a day since mid-December. Insulate Britain's protests cost the taxpayer at least £4.3 million. The group blocked motorways for 3 months, calling on the government to cut carbon emissions by insulating homes. The Metropolitan Police spent the bulk of the money with over 6,600 officers and staff dealing with the campaigners. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said he was appalled by the bill. The social care system is not fit for purpose and is handing some children over to criminal gangs. That's according to a new report. The Commission on Young Lives says many teenagers are moved away from where they live and sometimes end up in areas with high levels of crime. Criminal gangs have also been tipped off when vulnerable teens are moved into unregulated accommodation. The Department for Education says it is urgently reforming the system to address growing pressures. Former Children's Commissioner for England and chair of the report, Anne Longfield, told GB News more needs to be done.
We've got is, in all kind of essence, an epidemic of teenagers that are coming to harm. They're being exploited, they're being targeted by gangs and those that wish to involve them in violence. I'd like a new teenagers' social care system, if you like. I'd like it to really concentrate on understanding and recognising when teenagers were at harm early and working with those families to wrap support around those families. We need a kind of ring of protection for those kids.
An economic think tank is warning that millions of families face a cost of living catastrophe in 2022. The Resolution Foundation says that from next April, families will be £1,200 a year worse off due to soaring energy bills and rises in national insurance contributions. At the same time, rising inflation means that real pay levels will stay the same. A Merseyside police officer has been sacked for gross misconduct for taking selfies at a murder scene while on duty. PC Ryan Connolly took photos of himself while guarding the cordon in 2018. He also had homophobic, racist and offensive images on his phone. Deputy Chief Constable Ian Critchley said Connolly's actions were appalling and beyond comprehension. Flights to and from UK airports are down 71% since the start of the pandemic. Aviation analytics firm Cirium say there were around 400,000 international trips this year, compared with 1.3 million in 2019. They claim recovery has been slow due to testing and quarantine requirements, plus fears of countries being added to the red list. You're up to date with the latest news. We'll have more for you in half an hour.
Well, sorry to keep focusing on COVID, but there are some potentially significant developments in the offing this lunchtime. That's because the cabinet of the SNP-led government in Scotland has been meeting this morning, we think, ahead of a session of the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood due to start with the MSPs there at 2 o'clock, so pretty soon. And that coming as Nicola Sturgeon faces criticism for taking what some see as an excessively draconian approach to Omicron that risks making it impossible for struggling Scots businesses, in some instances, potentially to survive. It's reported that the First Minister may announce a shortening of the self-isolation period in Scotland to fall into line with the 7-day quarantine that's required currently in England. COVID cases in Scotland, they're on the up. Numbers rose by 11,000 on Boxing Day. But according to the latest data, the key metric, that is the number of people who are going into hospital, the hospitalisations, those figures are not rising, if at all, then certainly not sharply, at least not yet. The SNP's tough line on restrictions, including the cancellation of large gatherings for Hogmanay, has prompted speculation that thousands of Scots will travel southwards across the border to welcome in the new year. This morning, the Liberal Democrat MP Christine Jardine spoke to our breakfast programme, condemning the UK's devolved approach to COVID.
Should have had from the beginning in this, I believe, is that we should have had a much more concerted, more cooperative, four nations approach. The United Kingdom government should have been, if you like, setting the benchmarks, and we should have had local responses to what was happening. Instead of which we have this confusion about the UK government saying one thing and then the Scottish government saying another.
Let's turn to Stephen Montgomery, who's a spokesperson for the Scottish Hospitality Group, representing some of Scotland's best and most loved pubs, bars and restaurants. Stephen, thanks so much for your time. Shall we start by reflecting on the fact that I suppose the great tragedy for businesses in all this is this would have been a time stretching potentially for weeks that could have really have allowed some of the ones that were struggling during COVID to catch up, to replenish their coffers, to tap into some of that pent-up demand that must be out there.
Yeah, surely it's just been another Inus Horribilis, I think, over the last year. And, you know, in December, we traditionally take probably about 35% of our annual turnover to get us through the Christmas, you know, which is great. And then into January, February, March was the quietest times. And now we turn our focus to Hogmanay after an absolutely tsunami of cancellations over Christmas. And we turn our attentions now to Hogmanay, which is probably one of the biggest events on the Scottish calendar, and I think there's no doubt about it that we will see people across the border into England, mainly I think from down around the southwest of Scotland here and probably around the borders, because we are, if you take Gretna for example, it's only a couple of metres across the border and you're at your first pub.
And if people are piling down to Berwick or on the other side to Carlisle, we can peddle statistics until the cows come home, but those images of people, flying the Saltire, whatever else they'll be doing in their cars on the A74. That is such a strong image, isn't it, of people deserting one regime for another.
Yeah, well, I mean, Scotland's well known for its Hogmanay, isn't it? It's their traditional in Scotland. And I just listened to Christine Jardine earlier on, and I actually agree with what she said. That it would have been better for the four nations to have taken a better approach in this and stopped kicking the political ball up and down the A1. Because hospitality has certainly been a pawn in that political game. And we wouldn't have seen the problems where we would have cross-border travel. We wouldn't have seen the problems we have with fighting for the scraps of money that we're getting and all that kind of thing. So certainly today, when the First Minister speaks, we need clarity that hopefully clinicians' agreeance that the 7-day isolation would run along with England as well. And we must get a clear statement on the 3 weeks sharp shock that we've been put into now. where we see 1 metre social distancing and table service. We see, 1 metre social distance between the groups of 3, and whether that's actually going to be 3 weeks or not, because if you remember back in Scotland here in October last year, we had what was again a 3-week sharp shock that ended up into over 200 days, which really crippled businesses with very little support as well. And my heart goes out to especially our staff at this time as well, who are being kept unsure of where their financial construction is coming from as well.
Internationally, Stephen, the wind seems to be blowing in a positive direction, in the sense that we were reporting earlier on this hour that in America there's talk of self-isolation now for 5 days, down from 10. Obviously, England 7, but talk that they may go down to 5 as well. For some people, this will strike them as academic, but if you're running a pub or a restaurant and somebody's pinged or they've got COVID and they've got to self-isolate for 10 days, taking them out of the workplace at a critical time, perhaps sometimes even if they haven't got COVID, that's a huge problem.
We're actually having that. We brought up the pandemic a few months back as well, and we've just had a resurgence of that. It's like deja vu in every single thing we see at the moment. Even in my own business here, we've had most of our staff off as well, and not because I've caught COVID within a hospitality setting, but because they've been a contact of a family member, and that's been 10 days. And we've just welcomed actually 2 of our members, our key members, back to work today, which is great to have them back. So if it's reduced down to 7 days, and if the clinicians and it's medically proven that it can be down to 5 and it can be a test and release, we would welcome that. And I think the staff would welcome that too, especially at the busy time of year.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. And I'm sure they'd probably wish they could be busier. We were talking in the last hour, Stephen, to a publican from Rochdale who was saying actually he was surprised by how much demand was holding up, and he hadn't seen that many cancellations. Office parties that he expected to lose didn't disappear. He attributed that partly to the fact that his pub was in a village rather than in his city centre. Perhaps people were a little less wary, therefore, of going to that. But what's the cancellation picture, the no-show picture amongst your members?
Well, if you take my own business, we had 489 cancellations after the Public Health Scotland advice came out Thursday week ago. So that was devastating. We had to cancel all our, got to the point where we did have to cancel all our Christmas party nights in one of my other places. And then the support starting to come through, hopefully beginning of January. We're seeing, 66 million being divided up between some of the people in hospitality and the wider places. And that is going to be carte blanche to everybody that had, support before. But then we will see a further tranche of funding come out at the end of January from the 275 million that the UK government have also given Scotland, which I would like to thank them for. But we have to have a clear steer in that from the First Minister today, that support will go directly to those businesses who were directly affected by the Public Health Scotland and the Christmas cancellations, and not just a carte blanche effort to everybody that didn't deserve it. Has got to go to those that absolutely have been decimated over the Christmas and New Year.
Fingers crossed you'll get the news that you want, Stephen, at 2 o'clock when Nicola Sturgeon addresses those MSPs at Holyrood. Stephen Montgomery, appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Colin. Thank you.
Now, the eco-warriors, if that's what they are, from Insulate Britain, who blocked roads and glued their hands to the tarmac, cost taxpayers more than £4 million in a 3-month or thereabouts period. So much the Metropolitan Police spent on policing the protest between September and November. 4 other forces spent more than £300,000 combined. Insulate Britain wanted the government to pay for the insulation of all British homes by 2030 in an effort to combat carbon emissions. But the government spent that amount, or the amount that could have insulated around 3,500 homes, just trying to get Insulate Britain activists to behave themselves. Kevin Hurley is a regular contributor here, a former Detective Chief Superintendent at the Met and a former head of the London Anti-Knife Crime Operation. Kevin, thanks ever so much for joining us. I think you've stopped your car, so appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. It's expensive policing, especially if you've got to pull in people for overtime, unscheduled operations. I mean, in a sense, yes, it's an eye-catching figure. It could have been worse.
Yeah, it could have been much worse. But the hidden figure in this is that will be literally hundreds of people taken off their local patrols who should be dealing with loutish behaviour, antisocial behaviour, domestic violence to women, child abuse allegations and so on, and people who urgently need police attention will be waiting even hours on the 999 call, because every single one of those people normally drives a patrol car, rides a pedal cycle, or a few of them walk the beat. It's utterly selfish what these people are doing, self-indulgent, retired for the most part, egotistical, middle-class people. And they're all barking on the same tree that everyone else believes in. We know we've got to deal with climate change. But all these people are doing is taking our police away from protecting those who need it most. And by that I mean vulnerable missing people, mentally ill people, women suffering from domestic violence, and abused children. Very, very selfish people.
What lessons? I mean, it feels like it's all past. It may pop up again. It may all restart again, heaven forfend, in the new year. But I just wonder, Kevin, what lessons, if any, can the Met draw from what happened, the way they policed it, the way, it was like trying to squeeze a bubble, wasn't it? They would deal with the situation in one area, the protesters would pop up somewhere else. And that sense also, I think, that a lot of us felt that it was corrosive for our trust in the whole concept of policing by consent, because we are happy as citizens to grant the police the right to arrest people, etc., etc. But there were people disrupting, stopping ambulances, for instance. People could have intervened themselves to remove some of those protesters, but in a law-abiding society, we'll leave that to the police. And I just wonder whether some people have walked away from it thinking a little less of the police now.
There's absolutely no doubt of that. I mean, we saw the incident with the Hertfordshire Chief Inspector, where she was saying, well, I hope you're not too uncomfortable, officers will come and help you, and so on. But I think the big lesson police take from this is the way they're dealing with it now, which is by means of High Court injunctions, where the first few of them have been sent to prison for 6 months. So a very useful lesson there. There is a more unpleasant side of this, that this has also been a driver behind the government bringing in quite oppressive legislation to all of us with our right to free speech, and it's going to be slipped in over the next few months, where everyone's right to demonstrate on other issues is going to be quite restricted now. So these selfish people have damaged all of us and damaged all of our own right to demonstrate as we see fit. But the main lesson for police is that they are now dealing with this by civil High Court injunctions. Good news.
Is there another lesson, Kevin, I think, which is that actually when push comes to shove, I mean, literally, actually, push comes to shove, we are a very tolerant people. I mean, I don't know what the figure is, but it might not be unadjacent to about 95% of all the regimes in the world, where these protesters blocking major arterial roads like the M25, or in some instances, busy intersections in central London. The police would have arrived with their bamboo batons, their tasers, their pepper spray, and some of those protesters, well, if they'd been glued to the tarmac, their hands wouldn't have stayed glued there for very long, and they would have been invited into the back of the van for a, in quotes, talking to. I mean, there is a sense in which our system worked in the sense that we waited for the courts to administer justice, which, it took far too long, but eventually it did work.
Yeah, I mean, it did work, but it probably cost hundreds of millions of pounds in lost opportunity for the tens of thousands of people who were blocked up. People couldn't visit ageing relatives, people couldn't get to cancer treatment, medicine, and so on. So yes, it did work, but I do think there is a lesson for dealing with people, and it isn't one of we should be dealing with them by means of push comes to shove, because that actually results in a lot of people being hurt, not least the police, very manpower intensive. I think the time has come where police should be starting to look at indulging in buying water cannons, as Boris Johnson once did, before they were blocked by Theresa May. Because whilst these people are not particularly violent or very difficult, there are lots of groups police now confront are extremely violent, and we end up with these terrible scenes of police fighting and battering them, officers being investigated for months, if not years, people injured on both sides, when in fact a good washing down and being sprayed out of the way would quite often resolve the problem with minimal injury and a few allegations against police. So I do think we need to move beyond thinking of the good old days, because dealing with people with buttons and shields and helmets, and I've done it, is extremely violent and nasty. You don't see much of what goes on the camera, particularly when it's in the dark, but both the sides get hurt. We need to stop that, and water cannon is actually quite a modern way of doing that. Another
we anticipate Sorry, Kevin, I was going to say we anticipate a fairly quiet news day tomorrow, so maybe we'll try and debate that, get somebody for and against the case for water cannons.
I'm happy with that.
Okay, Kevin Hurley, we've got to leave it there. I'm so sorry. We'll let you carry on with your journey, but thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Coming up, the sports commentator Aidan McGee brings us the latest on England's, well, it's probably fair to say, shocking third Ashes test. That's after the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there. Mild and breezy through today and in fact into the new year with rain at times. Now low pressure in charge through this afternoon. You can see a real squeeze on the isobars. Successive areas of cloud and rain pushing from the southwest towards the northeast. And what happens in between, you will see some sunshine. So despite the fact for many of us it was a wet start to the day, the rain is now moving ever northwards, lingering across central and northern areas of Scotland with a strong wind. Cloud breaks across England and Wales and Northern Ireland as we head through the afternoon, but still quite a brisk breeze. And you can see more rain waiting in the wings later, but temperatures will be on the mild side, coming in around 12 to 15 degrees Celsius. Now, through Wednesday evening and overnight, that rain clears the far north of Scotland. More rain arrives towards the southwest. In between, some clearer skies, temperatures across the northeast of Scotland as low as 4 or 5 Celsius. Elsewhere, another mild end to the night. And again, you will see more rain as you step out on a Thursday morning. So, Thursday morning, wet and windy for many. Now, the rain could be heavy in places through the morning into the afternoon for Wales, Northern England, East Anglia, and again, some heavy bursts for the northeast of Scotland. But across the north of the country, it will clear through the day. Some brighter skies, still quite breezy, but more rain continues, particularly across Wales and the West Country with that keen wind. Temperatures again will be on the mild side, 11 to 12, 13, 14 degrees Celsius, brighter towards the northeast. So that's the pictures we head through Thursday. Through Thursday evening and overnight, that rain continues its passage northwards. And again, murky skies further south, a bit damp, clearer skies across the far north, but temperatures holding up with that breeze, and that extends into New Year's Eve. And in fact, for New Year's Day as well, with some sunshine coming through. Bye-bye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GBNews.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Well, England's hopes of regaining the Ashes are well and truly, I think it's fair to say, obliterated after it took Australia a mere dozen days of Test cricket to secure the urn again. The Aussies won ultimately by an innings and 14 runs in Melbourne. And a whitewash, frankly, now looks on the cards. The England side's collective batting average of just 18 runs at Brisbane, Adelaide and Melbourne. That is their lowest in a Test series since 1890. 1890. Aidan McGee is a sports broadcaster and writer, joins us now to wallow in our collective grief, Aidan. It's been a shocking display. And I tuned in for that first delivery of, it's a sort of habit lots of us have, isn't it? The first ball, the first over of the first Test. Rory Burns, golden duck, bowled around his legs and straight away, head in hands, you know what's coming.
Yeah, I mean, it set the tone, didn't it? And don't forget, this is, yes, don't get me wrong, going to Australia on tour is a very difficult assignment for an England team, but this is not the Australia of the 90s that I grew up with. There's no Shane Warne, there's no Ricky Ponting, there's no Glenn McGrath, there's no Steve Waugh. This is actually quite an average side in terms of batting. The bowling was absolutely superb, you have to say. It was Stark and Cummings leading the way and really making mincemeat of the England batting lineup. But there's wider questions now to ponder, as usual, when we have a big upset in terms of, something that happens to one of our national teams, we start soul searching. But this time I think it's fully justified. I just don't believe that this side is capable of taking us any further. I'm not even sure there's much reason for the captain to continue as he is, despite the fact that Joe Root has been performing exceptionally well and being among the probably top three batsmen within the world in the last 3 years. So plenty of stuff to do in terms of rebuilding the side. But Colin, it's been a malaise that's been going on for the best part of 10 years. It's been covered up by some world-class performers like Root himself, Jimmy Anderson with the ball, and of course Alistair Cook, who's been really sorely missed in recent years as his captaincy came to an end.
And there's always more than one reason. That they're obviously undercooked. The batters in particular are really undercooked. But I wonder if you really pressed a lot of cricket fans and said, look, would you rather win the One-Day World Cup or would you rather win the Ashes? The purists, and I include myself in that number, would always say the Ashes. Of course, Test cricket is the acme. It's what you want to do well in. And we strongly suspect, that it's by focusing on the limited over version of the game that you then jeopardise some of those long-form skills, the patience, that grittiness that Test cricket requires. But I just wonder, actually, if you really did a poll of cricket fans and said, what would you rather, World Cup victory or Ashes victory? I'm not sure what answer you'd get.
I'm pretty sure you get the answer that you favour, and that's the Ashes. Now, something has to give. There's been a lot of criticism of the ECB for pushing the sport into the limited overs form with the white ball. Now, that comes at a cost, as you've just alluded to there. It means that the county championship is where you get your Test performers from. That's where they learn what you call the dark arts of Test cricket. Now, it's been phased out effectively. It's been marginalised in the schedule. I suppose they'll point to the fact, well, hang on a minute, if you play these games, no matter what time of year you play the games, you tune into Sky and see a reporter telling you what's going on there. It's often between a man and his dog, or in front of a man and his dog. So, you have to wonder how popular it is. But then in cricket, it's always been the case that the international game, just like rugby, is stronger than the county game or the club game, as we might call it in football.
But it's always been a business too, hasn't it? And if you are,
of course,
Adil Rashid, that you can make a lot more money from white ball cricket than Test cricket, and that's what you do. And who are we to say, actually, do you mind just earning less and playing Test cricket?
No, that's right. But then if you don't push the test game, now the problem it's got is a bit similar to problems we've seen darts and sports like that try to be revolutionised for the benefit of television. Now the broadcasters want what I would call, in pet food terms, bite-sized meaty chunks. They want more intervals where they can put advertising in there. They want a shorter, quicker, more palatable style of the games in order to attract new viewers and maybe capture their attention. Maybe if we look at football, for example, 90 minutes is a long time to capture someone's interest in a game. People do prefer to watch highlights. But with cricket, it goes on for days and days and days. Now, there has to be room for both. There has to be a room for the short form of the game. You've got the 100, you've got T20. England did very well at the World Cup, of course. And when a casual observer thinks of cricket, they think, well, England are world champions, so they can't be doing that badly. But it's a completely different game. Some of those players just can't hack it at test level. And we saw that batting is the weakness, and that's the skills that they haven't learned by the sacrificing of the county championship.
I'm probably about to overstate this quite grotesquely, Aidan, but I mean, for those of us who really look forward to an Ashes series, and particularly one in Australia, when you can just look at the TV pictures of that beautiful sort of vibrant greensward from the MCG or wherever it is, and it's the perfect tonic and counterpoint to the miserable greyness of an English winter. And I don't know about you, but I feel deprived, with a small d, of a bit more joy and transportation through cricket in Australia, because we've been so, I'm not going to use the word I want to use, lamentable.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, look, we're not used to having success or enjoying success on tour in Australia anyway. I mean, it's been 10 years since we actually won a test match there. If you look at the record more generally, more look at the touring record of England, we seem to be a team that play well at home, but not so much away. If you take the top three sides in world cricket, which I think you'd have to put down over the last few years as Australia, India and New Zealand, we're talking 29 tours there, one victory, just a solitary victory, 21 defeats. That's a lamentable record away from home. It seems that this team is not good enough to perform overseas, and that says something about the makeup of their personality. And I know that hasn't always been under Joe Root's captaincy. I realise that players have come and gone in that period, but is it a problem with the English psyche that playing at home but not playing away is what they do? We think of football teams, for example, if they play well at home but don't play well away, we think, well, hang on a minute, there's a psychological issue here. They haven't got the bottle to step out of their own front yard and play elsewhere and get a win on someone else's patch. That's a serious issue, one of a number of issues that the ECB have to look at going forward.
Yeah, all's not well with English cricket, that is for sure. Aidan McGee, really appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Colin.
Well, one of the stories that's got you going today, situation in Scotland, just to mark your card, 2 o'clock, the MSPs at Holyrood, the Scottish Parliament, will be addressed by the First Minister about those COVID regulations that the SNP, in the eyes of some, have imposed a little too draconianly. Is that a word you can use? Anyway, much to the unhappiness of many in the hospitality sector in particular. John emails to say, one must ask the question, do they want to control themselves or do they want Westminster to take control? Not sure that's necessarily the right question, but it's a question. Mark says, both Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford aren't frightened to take unpopular decisions, while Boris Johnson doesn't like to be unpopular. Alan says, why should England do what Scotland and Wales do if they have a more adult approach to the situation? Devolved government's hatred of England is the real reason for these draconian measures. Draconian is definitely not a word, by the way. On the Insulate Britain protest, David emailed in to say, it's a waste of public money, public sector with no financial accountability yet again. It is cheaper to arrest and jail them after the first event. Keep them coming in. We'll try and share some of them later. Coming up, J.K. Rowling has been expelled from her own Hogwarts reunion on account of her what have been described as anti-trans comments, but will appear in old recorded footage. That's after this news update with Paul.
Thanks, Colin. Some doctors have told the Prime Minister that 90% of people in intensive care have not received their booster. Speaking at a vaccination centre, Boris Johnson said 2.4 million double jab people hadn't had their booster. He's urging them to get the jab so they can enjoy the new year. Scottish Parliament will be recalled this afternoon for a COVID update as case numbers reach record highs. The virtual session was announced last week after new restrictions came in, including closing nightclubs and introducing 1 metre social distancing. Scots are also being urged not to travel to England for New Year's Eve, where clubs are still open. Some pharmacies are reporting a huge problem with shortages of lateral flow tests, saying there were requests every 5 minutes over Christmas. The Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies is warning of patchy supplies following a change in self-isolation rules from 10 to 7 days if someone tests negative. The social care system is not fit for purpose and is handing some children over to criminal gangs. That's according to a new report. The Commission on Young Lives says many teenagers are moved away from where they live and sometimes end up in areas with high levels of crime. The Department for Education says it is urgently reforming the system to address growing pressures. An economic think tank is warning that millions of families face a cost of living catastrophe in 2022. The Resolution Foundation says from next April, families will be £1,200 a year worse off due to soaring energy bills and a rise in national insurance contributions. And the Royal Mint has unveiled 2 new coins to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. The 50p coin is the first of its kind to recognise a royal event, whilst the £5 coin follows a tradition of marking previous Jubilees on crown pieces. That is what is happening in the world at just gone 25 minutes to 2. We'll have more for you on the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Now, the Harry Potter author, J.K. Rowling, will appear in the 20th anniversary of a Harry Potter reunion special airing this New Year's Day, but only in throwback clips and images. She's been expelled, it seems, from the Return to Hogwarts special for her criticism of the term people who menstruate to describe biological females, comments that were considered by some to be anti-trans. Well, the Harry Potter star Daniel Radcliffe himself spoke out against her comments, insisting that trans women are women, that was his exact quote, trans women are women, and apologising for those who, quote, now feel their experience of the books has been tarnished or diminished. Well, now in the special, he speaks of how her books help bring kids back into reading with their magical storytelling. He might have added that her books also delivered him quite a successful career, but he hasn't chosen to say that, has he? Tom Slater is the editor of Spiked Online and joins me now. Tom, hi to you. Wretched ingrates.
It's hard not to come to that conclusion, isn't it? Especially because of the fact that, if we're being honest, Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint, slightly ropey talent, shall we say, they were really made by this series. They were really made by J.K. Rowling's work, and yet the ungratefulness in their responses in recent months, all kind of tweeting their disapproval in one way, shape or form, I think it's been quite shocking. And also with this HBO Max retrospective, as you say, this great reunion, the way in which she's more or less just been etched at the picture, confined to some archive footage and to some discussion of her as if she's died or something, rather than actually being the key person who's very much still alive and still around here. But it just goes to show the groupthink on this issue, as you suggest.
How important to the debate around trans women is J.K. Rowling? Because I mean, she's clearly she's uncancelable, and she's got enough lolly behind her and a big enough profile on Twitter and elsewhere to be listened to. But the flip side of that is that every time she gets stuck into this conversation, to put it mildly, there are people on the fanatical fringes of the conversation who decide that they will not tolerate anything she has to say on the subject. I mean, most recently they published her address, less than helpfully. So she actually is having to put up on just in terms of her day-to-day living and the lives of her family too, with quite a lot of aggro.
No, it's very, very serious. I mean, as you say, she's uncancelable insofar as it's inconceivable that anyone could deprive her of her income at this point. But at the same time, she has been kind of cast out of polite society. There's been these kind of increasingly quite Stalinist attempts to etch her out of her own work. Obviously, we were talking about this retrospective, but also recently the trailers for the new Fantastic Beasts film, which is part of the kind of Potter universe. She's only mentioned in a very small publishing credit at the end, despite the fact that she, wrote the screenplay. She did previously, when the first film this came out, her name was all over it. And as you say, the way in which it's turned almost a lot more threatening, where the online threats have kind of moved to offline recently in some respects. So she is taking a hell of a lot of flack for this. And the fact that she's become so crucial to this discussion, I think, is...
Oh, Tom, I do apologise that the tech gremlins have intervened. We got at least a couple of answers away. Tom Slater from Spiked with his views on the fact that J.K. Rowling is not going to be there in person to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the first Harry Potter film. Those actors whose careers she effectively launched, not showing a great deal of gratitude to her subsequently. Well, different story altogether. Are you one of those people perhaps who've managed to save up some cash during lockdown? There is some certainly there was some pent-up demand that was seen as being there. Research today saying that lockdown savers have, quote, spent around a fifth of their cash pots on average. Some 70% of people said they'd been able to put money aside during the pandemic. Fewer opportunities, obviously, to spend in things like retail. The average amount people managed to save who took part in this survey, £1,216. Some don't have anything like that amount. Jasmine Birtles is the founder of moneymagpie.com. Delighted to say she's taken the trouble to come into the studio, so thank you. Thanks for that. The pandemic's been with us for over 18 months now. There is a sense in which we've seen some ups and downs, some undulations of saving, and then suddenly the air brakes have come off and people have spent with gusto. But overall, it has been, if I can put it in the kindest possible way, a savings opportunity.
Well, yes, absolutely. And what it has done, it has increased the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So, as you've mentioned, there have been a lot of people who've been able to save, and this will make you feel warm and fuzzy. The top 5 richest people in the world saw their combined income increase by $270 billion in 2020. So
I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah.
So I know this is often, it's great to mount the barricades and build class warrior about it, but actually in terms of the personal tax they also pay.
That's a very good point.
Is it the top 1% pay 50% of all income tax?
Apparently so, yes. And I know that Elon Musk has talked about that quite a lot, and he's had a very open discussion with online about it. But yes, absolutely. And what the Resolution Foundation found is that the top 10% in this country did increase their income by 50 grand, whereas the bottom 10% lost. So we do have a situation where you have, as you say, during lockdown, where you didn't have to spend anything, and particularly if you were still working, if you were able to work from home, if you were on furlough, even at 80%, you know, if you're not having to spend very much other than your essentials, well, that's a brilliant time to save. But then you have other people who, for whatever reason, were not able to work. They weren't able to get, quite often they'd be on part-time work, maybe working in hospitality. They weren't on furlough. And so for them, the debt charities have said there has been quite a tsunami, really, of debt problems that have come into their doors.
And how much of this breaks down according to which generational cohort you belong to? Because I know, you know, it's a frequent and I think justifiable lament that a lot of young people have, which is don't talk to me about saving. I haven't got any, and I really need some to put a deposit on my first property.
Yes.
You know, you guys, you boomers, you've had it great, and actually you quite enjoyed lockdown. And by the way, you didn't need to go to work to meet people because you're already married or whatever.
Exactly.
But, you know, they've had the rough end of the stick.
Yes, they have. And I'm glad to see that the government has recognised this to some extent. They set up the Kickstarter scheme, which was a good idea, not necessarily brilliantly put in practice, but it was a very good idea to help young people into jobs, because it's been hard for young people to get into jobs anyway, and then lockdown happened and it was even harder, and many of the jobs, particularly entertainment, again, hospitality, travel, many of the areas that young people would like to go in were particularly badly hit. So yes, there is definitely a generational divide. The older people have managed to save, as you say, many people have quite enjoyed lockdown, frankly, and made new friends, got to know their neighbours, whereas other people, and particularly the young, have found it very hard. And of course, we've seen quite a large problem in the mental health area, again with the young.
This is more of a question for an economist than somebody whose expertise is personal finance, but in terms of whether perhaps that worm begins to turn for young people. We were talking earlier in the hour about inflation, some predictions 6% next year. Yep. And we know inflation's bad for the oldies because particularly pensioners who've got a fixed income, they can't grow. Whereas if you're younger and you're part of that wage price spiral and you start, particularly if it is the case that we are facing a real demographic crunch now in the workplace, and I think there are signs of this coming through, and you're in a much better bargaining position, arguably.
Yes.
If there are lots of people chasing too few jobs and you can bid up your salary, then maybe there's, inflation's not all bad, is what I think I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. No, it's really not. And I totally agree. I think that wages are going up. I'm not sure that they're actually keeping pace with inflation as it happens, but they are going up. And at some point, I hope, inflation will abate. I'm not seeing it probably for 2022. I think we are going to see rampant inflation as it happens. But I agree that the young people are in a very good position to bargain. And also, of course, many things are going online. Younger people are very much more used to online. You've got those who are learning about blockchain, the coders. A lot of them know how to code already when they come out of school. So they are ahead. And if they can keep on to that, the online bandwagon, as it were, then I think that the future is bright for the young people.
We've come to that part of the journalistic calendar towards the end of the year where the predictions are being made and we look backwards to the year that's been. And I noticed today in the papers the housing market is a hardy perennial for many of them, but particularly at this time of the year, and throwing forward to what may yet to be to come. And I mean, I know what's a good news story for somebody maybe of my age is not necessarily a good news story for somebody who's 25.
True.
But predict the housing market for us in 2022.
So it's a really good question, because I was thinking about this morning. I am that sad. Because I was thinking, what you would expect, because we are expecting interest rates to go up, not massively.
They've already gone up a little bit.
Little bits, yes. I think incrementally that it will go up. So that you would think would make mortgages more expensive. That would bring down the price of houses. However, because I think inflation is going to be rampant, people are going to be looking to commodities, things that you can hold in your hands almost, to invest in. Gold, I think, is going to go up. It should have gone up over the last few years. But anyway, I think it will. Commodities generally. Housing, I think, will be seen as a really good investment. So I'm going to stick my neck out here and say I think that house prices are going to go up. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing because, as you say, for many people, particularly for the young, they're trying to get on the housing ladder. It is really not helpful to see the prices go out of their hands. But I think potentially that is going to happen in 2022. Let's see.
Let's see, indeed. Jasmine, so good of you to come in. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. Well, we've mentioned, haven't we, throughout the course of today, that Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, will address MSPs at Holyrood in Edinburgh in, expected to take to her feet in the next 10 minutes or thereabouts. The COVID regulations in Scotland. I was speculating a couple of hours ago with David Olson, our Scotland correspondent, that this may be the moment perhaps for a minor relaxation, particularly around the rules that govern how much people have to self-isolate, how long they've got to be effectively in quarantine for. Brought you some news earlier from America. They're now down to 5 days of self-isolation. In England, from 10 down to 7. Some people calling for a further cut down to 5. For why? Because a lot of people in sometimes quite critical industries, not least in the National Health Service, but also in hospitality and other sectors, are being pinged, or they've had COVID, or they've certainly been told to self-isolate by track and trace. And it may have a potentially crippling effect if you're running a business or certainly trying to make a ward work with all the staff that you need there, and instead they're simply off having been pinged. Let's turn to Davy now to look forward to what Nicola Sturgeon may have to say. You thought this may be more of a holding statement, Davy?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think we're going to see any further restrictions put in place. Certainly Hamza Yousaf, the Health Minister, came out and said that it's unlikely that there would be any changes to the restrictions. However, he said it was being reviewed on a daily basis. And we know that the SNP Cabinet have met today. We'll find out, obviously, shortly what Nicola Sturgeon's got to say, but I can't see there being much change there. There may be a reduction, as you say, in the isolation from 10 days to 7 days, or perhaps less. I don't know, but that's something that may come out of today. But I think it's just a case of reiterating the same message, stick to the guidelines. Help and support for businesses in terms of finances, reiterating that. Of course, that's great news for the SNP to make sure they're seen to be helping hospitality industries like nightclubs, of course, which are closed, and obviously the restrictions put in place now for restaurants and pubs in terms of 1 metre social distancing and 3 households in table service. So yeah, they'll be wanting to be seen to be doing something for that. But I think it really will just be reiterating the same points and go and get your booster as quickly as you possibly can.
You don't think she'll do anything or have anything to say, do you, Davey, about this suggestion that you're going to have convoys of cars flying down the A1 or on the other side down to Carlisle from the Scottish borders because people can't party over Hogmanay, but they can do so in England?
Oh, I'm pretty sure she'll have something to say in that. There's no doubt about that. She will come out and say, don't do it. Obviously, she can't stop people doing that, but she will certainly strongly advise against that. And you have to kind of understand where she's coming from. Really, people going from Scotland to England or vice versa certainly doesn't make any sense at this particular moment in time. But I'm pretty certain that people will travel. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Berwick-upon-Tweed, maybe further south as far as Newcastle. And on the other side, as you say, coming Carlisle to Dumfries and Galloway is literally 8 miles. So it's a very short distance to go for a night out if you wish to do so. You can even get a taxi there and back. So I'm pretty sure people will do that, despite what Nicola Sturgeon says.
Yeah, it's such a frustration. We were talking an hour ago to somebody from Scottish Hospitality, the overarching organisation, who was just saying, and we've heard it again and again, but it bears repeating, that idea that after 18 months of financial privation, of people not spending as they would have wished, Christmas is the season in which a lot of hospitality businesses make up lost ground. It's just not happened this year.
No, it hasn't, and obviously Nicola Sturgeon said prior to Christmas, she said that she advised people to stay at home for those sort of 5 days before Christmas. So that certainly didn't really help the industry at all. And then obviously putting the restrictions in place again, it's been really, really tough. Obviously spoke to a number of businesses and pubs, etc., and clubs regarding this, and they're obviously absolutely desperate because this is a desperate situation. They've seen cancellations at the busiest time of the year. They've also got more cancellations. I've spoken to some about cancellations in January now because people are just not willing to risk it. So, yeah, unless there's more funding for these places, you do wonder whether some of them will still be open this time next year.
Yeah. David Donaldson, good to talk to you. Thanks ever so much. And just on this subject, lots of emails on Scotland, what's going to be announced or won't be announced today, self-isolation, how much relaxation there can be on that. Tony emailed to say these governments love COVID powers. It allows them to control their population even further for the greater good, in quotes. Wales and Scotland are prime examples of this. David emailed to say, not our David, one of the reasons lockdown hasn't worked in the UK is because there are so many people not following or policing the restrictions. I think, David, a lot of people would feel the restrictions have been policed all too well, sometimes quite literally. And Anna has emailed to say, Nicola Sturgeon has been crafty throughout the pandemic. She holds back until she knows what's going to be announced in England before making her move. Not so this time, Anna. It would appear, if anything, quite the reverse, perhaps. Much more news coming up, especially what's happening at Holyrood, that announcement from First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Thanks for joining us.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there. Mild and breezy through today and in fact into the new year with rain at times. Now, low pressure in charge through this afternoon. You can see a real squeeze on the isobars, successive areas of cloud and rain pushing from the southwest towards the northeast. And what happens in between, you will see some sunshine. So despite the fact for many of us it was a wet start to the day, the rain is now moving ever northwards, lingering across central and northern areas of Scotland with a strong wind. Cloud breaks across England and Wales and Northern Ireland as we head through the afternoon, but still quite a brisk breeze. And you can see more rain waiting in the wings later. But temperatures will be on the mild side, coming in around 12 to 15 degrees Celsius. Now, through Wednesday evening and overnight, that rain clears the far north of Scotland. More rain arrives towards the southwest. In between, some clearer skies, temperatures across the northeast of Scotland as low as 4 or 5 Celsius. Elsewhere, another mild end to the night. And again, you will see more rain as you step out on a Thursday morning. So, Thursday morning, wet and windy for many. Now, the rain could be heavy in places through the morning into the afternoon for Wales, Northern England, East Anglia, and again, some heavy bursts for the northeast of Scotland. But across the north of the country, it will clear through the day. Some brighter skies, still quite breezy, but more rain continues, particularly across Wales and the West Country with that keen wind. Temperatures again will be on the mild side, 11 to 12, 13, 14 degrees Celsius, brighter towards the northeast. So that's the pictures we head through Thursday. Through Thursday evening and overnight, that rain continues its passage northwards. And again, murky skies further south, a bit damp, clearer skies across the far north, but temperatures holding up with that breeze, and that extends into New Year's Eve. And in fact, for New Year's Day as well, with some sunshine coming through. Bye-bye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gb